I'm a shorty, so I need to bring this down a bit. I was 22 years old when I left Melbourne. The year was 1987. Had I been brave, I would have left much earlier and never looked back. But I was too scared to completely lose my family. I love my brother, sister and cousin too much to cause them any further angst. Their lives would have been unbearable had I become the black sheep of the family who dared to be ungrateful. My aunt and uncle in Melbourne had arranged for me to live with relatives in the quiet suburb of Baulkham Hills. These relatives were both in their 70s and I arrived in Sydney on Anzac Day. Aunt Juliet had 6 adult children and grandchildren. Her kids having left home, she took me in like another daughter. Every morning she would have breakfast ready before I did the hour-and-a-half commute to work each morning. While I had been used to being screamed at first thing in the morning by the aunt I was living with in Melbourne, I was now greeted with a hug and kiss. My body was climatising to the new city and this new form of relating. I called Aunt Juliet AJ and she called me Jackson. She had a wicked sense of humour and she often played pranks on me. She handed me my own key and I was free to come and go as I wished. For the first time in my life, I looked forward to coming home. 3 of us would sit down in the evening and watch television together and AJ would stroke my hair. It was the first time I did not have to anticipate what was coming next. For the first time in my life, I was free of violence. By the time I was 12 years old, I had been raised by 5 personality disordered people. My father was capable of the most extreme acts of violence against my mother. My mother left him, taking me, my siblings, and my grandmother with her. My father murdered my mother and took his own life in front of my brother, sister, and I. I was 8, my brother 5, and my sister 4. We did not know where we were going to live or who we were going to live with. We were all wards of the state until my maternal Scottish grandmother got custody of the 3 of us. Mamie, my grandmother, was the light in my life. She was a large woman with silvery grey hair. She was a heavy smoker and drinker with a wry sense of humour. May was a party girl, but I always felt protected and cared for by her. I breathed a sigh of relief to have her in my life, but in one breath, she was gone. She got breast cancer and had a double mastectomy. The life slowly drained from her and she gave up the will to live. She died when I was 10. We lost all contact with my Scottish mum's side of the family and my Sri Lankan father's family took over our care. My father's sister to be exact. Soon the stroking of my hair by my grandma May turned to physical violence by my aunt. She would hit first, ask questions later, and the rage inside her was so deep it was unfathomable. My uncle, who had borderline personality disorder, was constantly stressed. It caused him to rage and he hit my aunt and my cousin on a regular basis. Although he never laid a hand on me or my siblings, we were terrified of him. In my Sri Lankan family, the only way to leave home was to get married. I wasn't ready to get married, and to be frank, the idea of being intimate with a man completely disinterested me. I was doing my Bachelor of Arts at Deakin University in Geelong part-time and working full-time at a local branch of the Commonwealth Bank. I knew the only way I could get away from my family would be to apply for a transfer on the graduate program through the bank when I finished my degree. The branch I was signed to in Sydney at the time was in a very dodgy part of town at the corner of Elizabeth and Pavoe Streets, right opposite Central Station. These days it's the trendy hipster area of Strawberry Hills bordering Surrey Hills. Some of the bank's clientele were high-class brothels like Touch of Class and the Journalists Club. About 6 months I got a part-time job evening at the Black Stump Steak Restaurant in Parramatta. Back then, Parramatta was kind of a multicultural but an unsafe metropolis with a high rate of crime at night. It wasn't quite the thriving business district it is today. A friend of mine from Melbourne had put me in touch with a friend of hers in Sydney. She took me under her wing and showed me the nightlife of Sydney. She introduced me to her flatmate Greg, and immediately we became close. He had left Wales when he was 18. Having travelled the world, he'd only been in Sydney for a few months like me. Together we discovered the joys of a wonderful new city, and we became inseparable. Each Sunday I would return to AJ's after having spent the weekend with Greg, and she would listen to all our adventures and laugh. One weekend we got lost out on the harbour in the middle of winter. Greg had assured me that if we followed the path from Cremorne Point, eventually around the next corner we would find Balmoral. After 5 hours of walking and the darkness descending, he finally conceded that we were lost. Luckily, 2 hapless fishermen rescued us and drove us back to Greg's place in Neutral Bay. Now at this point, you're probably thinking that Greg and I were lovers. I always knew I was gay. I knew when I was 10 years old, having had crushes on my female teachers and having fallen in love with my female best friend in high school. I had to keep my sexuality hidden in Melbourne. It just wasn't safe. Sydney in 1987, I was free to be my authentic self and lived mostly out as a lesbian. Sydney in the 80s was gay heaven for me. It's a shame he was a man, because we would have made the perfect couple. Wherever we went out, people thought we were straight and thought we were together. Greg and I discovered Sydney's vibrant gay dance party scene. It was the era of bacchanalia and rap parties, not rats like we have in 2022. Rats were freely available back then. The rap parties, and there was one on most weekends at the old showgrounds at Moore Park. There was also the huge Mardi Gras party each March and Sleazeball in September. One Saturday night, myself, Greg and another friend, Patrick, went to the party at the Hordern Pavilion and the Royal Hall of Industries, affectionately known as the RHI back then. Patrick gave me my first ecstasy tablet. I swallowed it with so much trepidation. I was generally a good girl, but there was this rebellious side to me that came out in the safety of Sydney. I'll try anything once, I said. Still live by that rule. That night I was immersed in the lights all around me and the heavy bump bump of 80s house music. There was no reality in those moments. This was pure fantasy and I loved it. I watched the lights bounce off my polished black Doc Martens like stars. My Doc Martens were so shiny back then. This wonderfully warm, euphoric feeling came over me. If I close my eyes now, I can still remember it. I had to be 22 again. I wanted to shout with happiness. This is what freedom is all about. I could feel it. I could taste it. I could smell it. I held it close, wrapped it in my arms, and never wanted to let it go. I was in love with life. Ecstasy will do that to you. Patrick picked me up and spun me around. Kylie's Put Your Hand on Your Heart was playing, and my own heart was bursting. 1987 was also the first year I went to Sleazeball. In the main entrance there was a group of 20 people playing Naked Twister. I saw my first cock ring, and for a lesbian that was really shocking. I didn't know where to look. There were super tall drag queens everywhere, people doing all sorts of things I had never seen before, and yes, ultimately it was incredibly sleazy. If my legs weren't dancing, my eyes were darting from one shocking act to another. It's pretty shocking when you're 22. This was now my life. Some nights I catch the train home to Seven Hills, then a bus to Falcombe Hills at first light, get home at 6 a.m, just in time to have a shower and head off to work. I'd left my past behind. My 20s kind of passed in a haze of dance parties, ecstasy, and just having a good time. That was Sydney in the 80s, and I wouldn't have changed a thing. I even fell in love and got into a relationship. But what remains unhealed catches up with you. She was incredibly cute, was an alcoholic who regularly self-harmed. When I was 28, I sought counselling for the first time when my 6-year relationship ended. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and so began the journey to address my traumatic childhood, which was playing out in my intimate relationships and friendships. In time, I was in love again. I ended up in a 20-year relationship with a woman. It slowly became covertly abusive. I left that relationship behind in 2012 when I was 47. I was a psychotherapist specialising in working with complex trauma. Like many of us, I taught myself what I needed to learn and tried to help others. These days, I limit how much time I spend with my family who still live in Melbourne. Their lives are very different to mine. While I love my highly functioning siblings, now in their 50s, they still remain in their trauma. My aunt and uncle still suffer with their personality disorders and remain ignorant to all the destruction they caused. My cousin did not survive our childhood. She died in 2014 when she turned 50. She went to sleep and she never woke up. She had a brain aneurysm, and in her death she left her 15-year-old daughter behind. I don't blame my cousin or siblings for the choices they made, but unlike them, I wanted something different for myself. I chose the path of healing. When it comes down to it, I really just wanted a better life. Sydney 1987 was all about that for me. Just leaving the past behind, healing and truly living. It was the first step on what has been an incredible journey to this day. It's going to make me emotional. I know in my heart, my grandmother May, my mum and my cousin would be incredibly proud of me.